So thank you all to be here, and thank you for the organizers to have this space in order to talk about digital rights, but applied in cities, which are, the first administration that citizens are just seeking when there are some problems. No, for example, with artificial intelligence in public space, which is one of the, let's say, main issues that we have so far. So. In this session, we'll talk about some solutions that are, let's say, leading cities in digital rights are tackling. We will start with Amsterdam, with Milou Jansen, which is also the coordinator of the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights, which is just a coalition that is gathering cities in order to foster digital rights when implementing tech services. So. If you can put the Zoom in the big screen. Oh yeah, we have Milou here. Cool.
Hello.
Hola. Whenever you want, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, muchas gracias, for the invitation to speak and to showcase how cities can also take a lead in showcasing how a responsible AI use can look like. Because we believe as a cities coalition, but also as a city in Amsterdam, that we should think about ethical and human-centered approaches of using AI in our public governance services and for decision-making in a democratic institution. And that's why it's really great to see that this topic is growing, sparks a lot of discussion, and also has led to some first implementations and ideas on how we can bring this move this forward. So we think in the city of Amsterdam that it's very important to organize public control over AI and algorithms in the city. On the one hand, we believe that for city administrations, it can really boost efficiency in a lot of different processes that we currently have. We are also thinking about how to make this a democratic undertaking, a joint undertaking that really adds value to the city. So I will be discussing the AI registry in the city of Amsterdam in a little bit. First, I wanted to give 3 examples of which kind of AI systems or algorithms you can find online that we use in the city. First, there's an algorithm used in the process of parking taxes, where there's a car driving around the city with someone driving the car. And this car is scanning cars that are parked. It automatically recognizes the license plate and then checks, did this car have the right to park? Did they pay the parking spot or not? If yes, then okay, delete, everything's fine. If no, then the municipality will follow up with a fine. So this is a way where AI can boost the efficiency of such a process, because Amsterdam is a really, really big city with really small amount of parking spaces. So to a lot of ground to cover. AI can make this a more efficient and more fair process, even perhaps. Then there is also the possibility for citizens to make reports on issues in public space. So this could be a street light that is no longer working, a loose tile in the street, maybe a boat speeding too much in the canal, who knows? So all of these issues of nuisance in public space, people can make a report to the municipality. Right now we have around 350,000 reports a year, so a lot of different topics to cover. And before, with the old system, citizens had to choose their categories manually, which ended up in a lot of, most of the complaints were classified in the category other. This caused a lot of delays in how efficient we could follow up on the reports. So now we use a machine learning classifier that automatically determines on the words that are in the report that citizens make to assign them to the right department. So, for example, if there's a report on a fallen tree, then this department can efficiently solve this report. Then the third one, which might even be a bit more risky, but it's mentioned in our AI registry. It's a pilot concerning the detection of holiday housing fraud. So people who rent their rooms, for example, via Airbnb constantly, there are a lot of policy rules, for example, saying that you can only sublet your apartment for 30 days in a year. And this also on this topic, citizens can make a report. So, for example, if a neighbor makes a report, then there's now a random forest kind of system used to see how likely it is that this report is actually a case of fraud. This is determined on past cases of the past 5 years. But then you can see with the examples that I'm naming right now, if for a democratic government, it becomes a kind of a black box how these AI systems help us in prioritizing decision making or categorizing or really guide us in how we organize our work, then it becomes very important to be transparent and to explain the grounds on which decisions are made. Because if this stays a black box operation, then it becomes really hard to explain the grounds of a certain decision or to dispute a certain decision. So it's really important to debunk this rhetorical tendency that some of the systems have. And this is why we joined forces with the city of Helsinki and with the platform of Sidot to make a first version, a beta version of the AI registry, where there are 3 types of information to be found about the AI systems that the public government of Amsterdam uses. First, this is kind of general description of the case, like the process, what's the purpose of the AI system, and what's the goal. Is there human decision making involved? How does how does it work? What's the purpose? Let's say. So that's more the general information. And then if you click a layer down, you can also find more technical information, like which system is used, which data is processed, which kind of techniques are used, for example, in terms of bias mitigation, things like this. And then the final one is also a deeper connecting the technical with fairness of decisions. So I think that gives a good overview of the summary and the purpose of the AI registry. Marc also asked me to be honest about what kind of lessons we learned on the way and what's not working that well. So we noticed that on the one hand, this AI registry really helped our political leadership to also see that algorithms are used in a lot of ways, that they should make decisions about them. But at the same time, it also becomes still quite hard to reach a conclusion, perhaps on how and where algorithms should be used or not. And then we only have about 5 systems now listed in the AI registry, but we've also received quite a lot of reports from journalists or civil society organizations to so it raised a lot more questions. Just putting the 5 systems up there, we weren't fully prepared for all the questions that would come back about these systems and about the other ones that are still also used in the municipality. Because the third difficulty we saw is that it's also quite hard to motivate managers and teams to all the systems in the municipality, to put them all online and to put them all in the registry, let's say. So I think we made a good start, but it takes also a lot more work than we thought, perhaps, to really include all the AI systems that we use. So that's kind of my reflection from practice. And maybe there's time for questions later, but this would be my contribution.
Thanks, Milou. Yeah, so when we open the discussion, we will just perform questions on that. So it's really interesting to see how, when you start a pilot project regarding algorithm registries, and then you open like a Pandora box because you are only putting some algorithms there, and for sure citizens know that there are more algorithms using AI in the city. So yeah, it's quite frightening to start in this way, maybe just taking into account that you have to have at least more algorithms to ensure that citizens know that they have all the information there. But thank you, Milou. Really interesting presentation. So we are moving to Neal from New York. Neal, the floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion later. So I'm going to go through very quickly 3 or 4 different applications of AI in the city that are sort of qualitatively different to give a sense of the range and diversity of it. But I'll start by just giving very quick level setting about the context of New York City itself. So it's the largest city in the United States. Population is around 8.5 million people or so. And just to give one sense of the sort of the scale that a lot of city agencies need to deal with, there's around, for example, 200 languages or so that are spoken in the city. The city government maintains around a dozen official languages that key documents are translated into, and offers sort of phone support in over 100 languages or so. So that's an example of just sort of the fabric that the city government operates in. The government itself is the 4th largest government in the United States at any level, including the federal government, which is, of course, the largest, and consists of around 330,000 employees across over 50 agencies. And the overall city budget floats around $90 billion or so. So it's a very large city government. It is decentralized. A lot of the individual agencies are also very large and themselves are not monolithic. So that's just sort of the baseline of the government itself. In terms of one recent effort, since we might be talking about registries here, the city recently completed, we don't call it a registry, but it's a disclosure report on the use of not AI, but we focus on what we call algorithmic tools, and we can come back to the distinction in the Q&A if it's of interest. But this disclosure report actually has 100% compliance across all city agencies. So there's, 15, 16, something like that, of these systems that qualify for the initial set of criteria that were laid out. But that was sort of a really important foundation to continue a lot of this work going forward, that every single agency has gone through this process, including agencies that were very busy last year, like the Department of Health, for example. So I'll go into some of the examples now, and these are just sort of high level. We can come back to them. So number 1 is cyber defense. So we have a cyber defense agency that is charged with protecting cities' cyber infrastructure. They use very large scale machine learning models, essentially on network hardware data, to detect potential intrusions, to detect anomalous behavior, things like that. These are really sort of large scale models, large scale data, the kinds of things that people are thinking about when they're thinking about AI. But this is also a purely internal application. It does not involve the general public. It does not involve people at all. So that's one. Number 2 is energy billing. So we have a sort of an administrative services agency that handles a lot of common administrative tasks citywide. And they're in charge of paying some of the city's energy bills. There's 10, 15, 20,000 bills like this that come in per month. And they essentially had a human team that was reviewing these things. There can be anomalous amounts that show up, and you need to catch these, otherwise the city will pay sort of incorrect bills. So they built a machine learning model internally to flag this sort of stuff using things like weather data, details of the facilities, and so on. And through this process, reduced the human effort that was required to flag these, since the humans only follow up on anomalies that are flagged by the system. And this saved the city, I think, $9–10 million or so. So a fairly significant savings and significantly more efficient. This is also sort of an administrative internal task that you might refer to as robotic process automation. It's essentially a type of anomaly detection as well, not unlike the cyber defense case, though the scale is very, very different. Third example is getting into sort of the social and human context, which is of interest to many people. So the city also uses this in the context of criminal justice for something called pretrial release assessment. So essentially, human judges need to figure out whether to let people out before their trial or a court date, and they're taking into account whether the person is going to sort of show up for the subsequent court date or not. And this is a longstanding thing in the criminal justice system. So the relevant agency partnered with some few other agencies in the government, as well as some external researchers that are experts in crime, in economics, social science, statistics, machine learning, and so on, updated the algorithms that are used to do this, and achieved some interesting outcomes. So first of all, they were able to significantly reduce the number of people that are held pre-trial, while not affecting the number of people that were showing up for the court date. So basically, there were a lot of people that were being held unnecessarily that were then let out. So this is sort of a significant impact on the general population. They also explicitly took into account existing historical racial disparities in these release assessments that were made on the human side. And the new system is essentially calibrated across different racial groups. So the sort of percentage of people that are being held across Black, white, Hispanic, other sorts of groups are essentially equal. This process also required gaining trust from members in the system. So it is the judges were all interviewed, the lawyers, other people that operate in the court systems, and the details of this whole process and study are also documented in a range of papers and studies and other things online. So that's a criminal justice kind of context. The last one I'll close with is a little bit different. So this is the New York City Department of Education. So the New York City school system is very large, it's around a million students, I think. And there is a significant operational problem in figuring out which kid goes to which high school, essentially. There are not enough slots, and you have to take into account admissions criteria, you have to take into account geography and other things. So around 20 years ago, I think, the Department of Education partnered with some researchers at Stanford in the economics department, actually, to design a matching system. So the students provide a preference ordering of schools that they would like to attend. The schools also have a preference ordering of sorts, and then there is a matching algorithm that assigns them all. And this is important partly because this is not an AI algorithm. It is not a machine learning or a statistical method. It is a game theoretic algorithm, actually, from microeconomics, that's sometimes called a Gale-Shapley algorithm or deferred acceptance. This was done in some Nobel Prize winning work by Al Roth and others. And it's just important to remember that AI gets a lot of attention and it's a sort of a big buzzword, but there are actually a host of other techniques in math, computer science, whatever else, that can also be brought to bear on a range of problems that face city governments. And the questions that one would ask about them are a little bit different. And a lot of these digital rights concerns that we all have can apply there as well. And there are those sorts of questions that arise in the context of this education system. But the details really matter in all of these cases. So I'll kind of close there, but this sort of gives a sense of the range, and all of these, of course, have to be done with an appropriate view towards digital rights and other considerations in the public interest. Thanks.
Thank you, Neal. Yeah, it's really interesting that it's not only AI, it's also just seeking the right algorithms, and maybe for some critical areas, it's better to think about the other deterministic algorithms rather than AI. Yeah, thank you. Really
Yeah, so just
interesting.
briefly, the disclosure report that I mentioned actually it partly doesn't focus on AI because things like the education system are included, and some of the AI applications that are backhouse are not included.
Yeah, thank you. So let's continue with Matteo from Trento. Hi there, Matteo.
Hello.
Hi.
So I will present some slides, if possible. Now let me check this, and 1 second, share screen, this one, share.
Yeah.
And now you should be able to see this. Okay. So welcome everyone. I'm the head of project management of Fondazione Bruno Kessler. I worked since a lot of years in digital transformation, public services, and so on. First as a researcher and then as more managing position. And today I will talk to you about a specific case, a European project, Project Simpatico, that was carried out between 2016 and 2019, but it's active still today, and is being used in a municipality not as big as the one that talked before me, but in the municipality of Trento. So this project the title is Simplifying the Interaction with Public Administration Through Information Technology for Citizens and Companies. So basically at that time, there was this big trend of public online services. And there was this problem that many cities were just digitalizing their forms and putting them online. And you know, that is a serious limitation. First, because it's complex to use, and then also the big problem is the language, especially in Italy and other countries, maybe a bit less in UK and for English, but the language is very complicated for people that are especially non-native speakers. So we tried to think about how can we make this public service easier to use and to lower administrative burden for citizens and companies. And the idea is to use to combine two approaches. One is AI. So the idea is to, based on the citizen profile, to adapt and simplify the language of documents and services and the interaction. So, I don't know, hiding irrelevant fields and so on. And on the other end, what we call the wisdom of the crowd. So can we have a database where citizens can raise questions, answer them, and have an award mechanism to incentivize expert participation? So basically, the system that we developed had 3 parts. Well, this is the legacy system. So we have a front end with an user, there is a workflow and a service interaction model. Our first part is to simplify the interaction. So use AI to simplify the text and workflow. Second part is to learn and adapt. So learn the interactions from past interaction and from the profile of the speaker to personalize. And the third part was to engage the community. So build a citizenpedia, a place where we can collect the knowledge about service, question and answer, and so on. We had 10 partners in 3 clusters, Italy, Spain, and UK, with 3 municipalities, Trento, Sheffield, and the Junta de Galicia. And these 3 municipalities were our 3 use cases. So I'll go quickly a little bit about our AI approach. So at the end, we had for the language 3 parts: a text profiling, a lexical simplification, and a sentence simplification. And the authoring tool is simply to help, is a tool to help a civil servant to identify if what they are producing, if the text they have in their online services and web is easy or not, let's say. This is an example that I can show you because it's an online tool. If I can find it, yes, it's here. If I can, yes. So this is, for example, the authoring tool of the municipality of Trento.
Matteo,
And
we are only seeing your slide. We are not seeing.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you are only sharing the PDF or.
Okay. One second. Let me stop share and share again the screen. That is screen 2. Yes. And
no
now
privacy,
you should see.
No. Perfect.
It's okay?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so this is an example of, let's say here, I have a pre-selected text that is difficult for Italy, for example, and this is just an example of what happens. So it selects difficult terms, it gives, these are metrics for difficulty of language, how much is difficult for someone that knows only 500 Italian words, up to 5,000 Italian words. It gives the details on the difficult word, like this is an acronym, for example, that is not well known, and so on. So going back to the presentation, so this is one tool, but the most important thing is how can we simplify the language? And of course, we built a system with a machine learning system with deep neural networks to first simplify the words. And here it's important to select difficult words, to select replacement, and to put them in the text. For example, pupils may be difficult for some speaker, and then we can exchange it with students. Or cutting down your drinking, maybe it's reduce, it's easier. Another example is syntactic and sentence simplification. So we have also here rule-based system to cut down sentence, make them easier, and so on, especially sentences with subordinates. I'm going quickly because my time is it's not much, but there is a website for this project that I can give you all details. And the other part is to simplify the structure of the interaction, the workflow, because this is an example of a request to enroll in nursery for the child, and it's very complex. So we want to adapt the workflow. So you just type your fiscal code, and then it fill this with all information. But more than that, you are guided on your interaction. Only the parts that are relevant at that time are highlighted, and you follow a flow that is not the flow of the form, but it adapts concerning your particular case. So, for example, here is the final version. So on the left, you have a list of steps. On the center, you have the form, but it only highlights the part that you actually need to fill. And on the right, you have this Citizenpedia that I was mentioning. So question and answer from people. And this is a real system, it's not research. This is a system that since 2019 it has been deployed on the city of Trento. It is used by people, and it is being increased. It increased the number of procedure and forms up to cover almost now all procedures of municipality of Trento. Okay, I hope I did not take too much time. Thanks for your attention.
Yeah, thank you.
That's it.
Thank you, Matteo. Really interesting. So I'm really proud to see H2020 project being in production.
Yeah, it's
my first time.
Not so easy. It's not so easy. But in fact, in 3 of the 3, we are able to be in production in Trento, and it was a bit more difficult for example, your Spain, Junta de Galicia, was difficult because, well, mainly because you have 2 languages, not 1, because there was also Gallego. And that language is very, very, very hard because you don't have any resources. So, and by law, you are required to use both. So it was not easy.
Yeah, it's not that easy, Yeah, thank you, Matteo. And let's move to Theo. Hi, Theo. Nice to meet you again.
Hi, great to be here and great to listen to all of our colleagues in the coalition talking about their experiences. I'm just going to share some slides here about the draft emerging tech charter for London. Hopefully, that can be seen on the screen. So this is something that we're developing in London. It's an example, I think, of what someone in the legal profession called agile governance approaches that cities are increasingly turning to, because the situation around technology is really quite dynamic. So what are the principles and rules by which we can shape and bring transparency to what's happening? So let me move to the next slide. So the purpose of the charter was set out by Sadiq Khan last year, in that London is a global city, a technology hub, but it's vital that Londoners and public bodies understand the full impacts of the technologies that are launched in our city and that innovations are designed with public needs in mind. So he's tasked me to convene some experts to look at how we can develop this charter for London. Early last year, we commissioned a report by the Digital Catapult, and this is called London, a Global Leader in Advanced Digital Technologies. And this looked at the kinds of technologies that were being spun up in our city and its application across the board, but specifically on smart cities. And these are the kinds of things that are already in use. We've got sensors, drones, and cameras. For example, in these are not universal, but are just being deployed in parts, mostly. So that's things like monitoring vulnerable residents living in public housing, through to the Metropolitan Police's piloting and deployment of live facial recognition technology. We've got a network of air quality sensors in London, an example of Internet of Things, smart mobility. Lots of cities trialing e-scooters, but we also have a connected autonomous vehicle lab that does live trials in public spaces. Use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So this is mainly in our city deployed in transport network. So looking at how people are using new cycling routes through artificial intelligence as opposed to human counters. Interesting use in the green transition of using artificial intelligence in waste auditing and identification in the recycling process. So an algorithm and an AI understands what kind of objects are going through our waste system, so in order to recycle better. And of course, the use of virtual reality and augmented reality. So not all of these are not all artificial intelligence, but are part of the suite of emerging technologies in our city. So the background to the charter is really about what our next step in our thinking is about innovation, particularly the new services that will come out of the digital infrastructure enabled by 5G and artificial intelligence. It's meant to be a supportive guide to innovation because we want innovation to happen in our city, but it's one that's informed by our experience of piloting and deploying technologies, often in silos. So when the police do something and the transport authority does something, or the local municipal authorities, of which we have 32, do something, we don't always learn from each other. So how do we consolidate that guidance in one place? And as people will also know, that the government guidance is often in various government departments because they're all interested in emerging technologies. So how do we get those in one place? It's quite complex for a buyer. It's quite complex for an innovator to find all of these materials and then abstract some principles from them. So we set up a working group and with our Smart London board, which is a high-level advisory board that helps me, had meetings with innovators. We surveyed people, so directly to people, not just engagement with civil society and those with a real, sort of just a vested interest in this, and talked to elected representatives. We had an online engagement with Talk London, which is our engagement platform. So we published this charter in draft, and it's still open for comment. And we're thinking about how best to present it as well, not just a sort of static PDF of you should do this, but actually something that's much more like a service, a walkthrough, to help people navigate the complex ethical issues that underpin a lot of these discussions. So who's it for? Buyers, so local government and public services, but also flexible enough to be useful to private operators of land or shopping malls or things like that. Makers, we want makers to understand the values by which we'd like and the things we'd like to see when you're developing new technology, and for Londoners and elected representatives. So they have reassurance that we have a framework for the deploying this technology in our city. So how does it work? The Charter provides 3 principles for implementing technology in London. 1, working in the open. 2, respecting diversity. And 3, ensuring trustworthiness in the use of data. These principles are brought to life by a series of suggested measures, and those measures by some living examples. So things that we've done that exemplify what we want to see. And they're supplemented by bringing together the resources that I set out. We think that all principles, working in the open, respecting diversity and trustworthiness, should apply to all technologies, but some measures may not, depending on the type of technology. So it's not a checklist, and it's not part of the procurement process at the moment, but it's, as I say, a guide for good innovation in our city. And, there are also boroughs and agencies. The boroughs are independent of City Hall. So we're the strategic authority. So they democratically might come up with a different approach, and there might well be a professional approach by the police on things linked with other police forces. So, we work within in that context. So principle 1, working in the open. So it starts with a value statement. When trialing and deploying emerging technologies, we aspire to work in the open whenever we can, sharing our thinking as we progress and working collaboratively with city authorities. And we set out measures like setting out in plain English to the public what the technology is, what it can do, why it's used, and where appropriate, the legal and ethical basis for doing so. And a really good example of this in practice, actually, although the police have been on a bit of a journey on live facial recognition, is how the police service explain the rules and grounds and legal background of why they use facial recognition in our city. And there's a link there to, you can Google it, on what I think is a really good transparency account of how the police use facial recognition. 2, we say that when you're trialing and deploying something, you should communicate with communities and allow them to talk back to you. So an example of that is when Transport for London in 2017 started collecting anonymized Wi-Fi data on London Underground to understand movements underground and busyness of the network, and engaged with the public and explained in a clear way how data was collected and allowed people to talk back to them. And 3, sharing data protection impact assessments, which under UK and European law, you're required to do if you collect personal data. Now, most authorities say that, obviously you have to fill out a DPIA, and they usually suggest that you should publish it openly. Well, we want to take that a step further. We think that you should publish it, and you should publish it on our data platform so that we can have an open, discoverable set of DPIAs on anything that collects personal data in our city. We don't think that's a burdensome thing, and we think transparency will tend towards good practice. So that's something that we're developing. We also have measures around how you should pilot something. A good example of that is our connected autonomous vehicle trials. And then also crucially, the how you can talk about additional functionality of a new technology, especially if it's software as a service, when it's used and the circumstances and the processes by which that functionality might be used in the future. That's really important for when software takes dumb things and makes them smarter. For example, existing CCTV camera feeds can be made much smarter by software, which could be used in a different jurisdiction, in a different way, or there could be added functionality to it. We want to understand what the kind of limit of what you're doing is, and when you would actually think about using more. And I think that's a really, really important measure that we need to think about. So principle 2 is respecting diversity, takes very much from the lead of the city's coalition here. By this, we interpret respecting diversity as using user design principles. So wherever possible, we should actually use an approach that is not solutionist and design around the needs of users. We also suggest consequence scanning, which is a tool which you can think about harms, and also reflecting on the existing public sector equality duty, which we use for all services and have for the last couple of decades. How does that duty kind of interact with new technologies? So we're kind of suggesting a couple of things that people could do on their traditional anti-discrimination thinking that need to be updated in relation to emerging technologies if deployed by the city. Principle 3 is trustworthiness, which includes the GDPR principles around privacy by design, making it easy for people who don't want their data captured not to do it, data ethics tools, and a number of measures around data collaboration, data standards, and cybersecurity guidance linking to national legislation. We supplement this by a collection of resources, which includes everything from design principles to how you should write in plain English, links to national guidance on explaining decisions by AI. In our view, this isn't in one place apart from in this document in the UK, and we hope to add to this as we do to the examples over time. So this is all based on us engaging directly with people around data and its use in their city. From 2018, when we engage people directly with the use of their data coinciding with GDPR and Data Protection Act, we asked people using quite a nice tool which allowed them to calculate how many people took the same journey as them in the morning using TfL data. We've asked people what they think about sensors, what they think about AI and cameras. And we've also engaged people in a variety of ways, as I said, the Wi-Fi data and also on healthcare data. We had a citizens summit, and the Metropolitan Police did a lot of work on live facial recognition technology. Elected representatives are a really important voice in all of this. And so, I think there are about 800 local councillors in London. We've engaged with them directly. And this is kind of what they think. And so this is from November 2020. What do you feel about different types of technology? Now, as per previous polling that we did, those technologies that people felt would more benefit to them, whether personally in 5G or environmental sensors that they felt were, going to help clear up poor air quality, people are quite positive about that stuff. Broadly speaking, that's not in your personal data category. Other kinds of technologies, they're less sure about. Still slightly positive about AI, but when you talk about algorithmic decisions, they're less confident about it. So even algorithmic decisions go on to a net negative. And the interesting thing about all of this is, in a sense, it's part of the same technology stack. So it really does sort of tend to support the argument that the more explainable things, the more transparent things, or the more that you can show benefits to people, the more they're willing to entertain the trade-off. And of course, members of the public don't have one view of technology. They might be quite supportive of sensors and more equivocal about security cameras. for example, or their healthcare data. And also Londoners have different views on data. There's some people who are very, they're totally okay with sharing their data and they want more innovation. And there are others that are more privacy sensitive. And there are a block of people who want to instrumentally know more about the benefits and what it means to them. So I think we need to, this has been really instructive exercise because it's allowed us to talk to people about data, formulate principles, understand what their thinking is about algorithms and AI, and develop something that we think is a practical guide for our city. And so when we ask them again, do you think, it's good for me in my job as Chief Digital Officer for London, do you think that public services should be trialing new technologies in cities? There's very strong support for that. They also felt that multi-stakeholders should be involved. They backed a public register for sensors that collected all data in London. And there was also support for this emerging tech charter. So that's the position in London. We hope to launch the tech charter, emerging tech charter in full in September. We want to, we will work after then to develop it as a living digital service. The opportunity for innovators here is if you follow the charter and do have really good examples of the charter in practice, your example gets added to the charter. So it's not just a collection of stuff that we think is good from the public sector. There's also an opportunity to showcase what's good practice here so others can learn from it. So we think, going back to that concept of agile governance, that in the absence of extra national legislation or European legislation and that will influence us and so on, that cities actually have a real role to play in bringing together this experience to help us as a city, help innovation, and also shape that future legislation as well. So I'll stop sharing there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Theo. Really, really interesting. So let's open the discussion. I will just throw out one question, but because you all have some things in common in your presentations related with trustworthiness, transparency, and explainability. So there are different approaches in Amsterdam with the AI registry algorithm. In New York City, we have an example of this disclosure agreement, and in field with the charter, we are also somehow boosting this explainability. So what do you think? That it's so the approaches are based on the citizen side of opinion that you feel in your city, or it's maybe something that it's more coming from the public administrations. What do you think? So we start with I don't know if Milou is there. We can start with Milou, but Neal, if you want to start.
You want me to start?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that there is one approach. I mean, I think that that's the most important thing. I think that there is different sorts of engagement. In some cases, the engagement is with between, for example, the technical owner of a particular system or process and an agency stakeholder, purely within the government. In other cases, it might be elected representatives. In other cases, it might be community organizations or the general public. So, part of the reason I went through several different categories of AI applications in the city is that you would sort of deal with those different systems quite differently. And engagement with, for example, judges in the case of something like criminal justice is very important. That's not the general public, but they're a critical part of the system. And I think that there is in the AI literature, research literature, a lot of discussion about terms like explainability, contestability, things like that. These are not standardized things, and in many cases, there is significant disagreement among academics and researchers about which one to use in which context, whether they are the right approach, how to implement them, how to operationalize them. And it sounds good to sort of promote transparency, but as I think we all know, all of these digital rights, privacy, transparency, accuracy, other things, are in tension with each other. They can sort of trade off with each other. So it is really important to, I think, be context specific, not sort of pretend that we know exactly what these terms mean in each given context, and understand how they relate to other things that we are also trying to achieve, like, privacy and fairness and non-discrimination and so on and so forth.
Yeah, yes, I totally agree with you. Milou, something to add?
Yeah, I want to ask if you could repeat the question.
Sure. So we were talking about the concepts of transparency, explainability, and trustworthiness, because all the presentations you performed was they have this thing in common. So in your situation, so in your scenario with the AI registry. What do you think? What it was the main booster in order to decide that the AI registry was the best approach to tackle these issues? Because it's only community engagement. It's more from the inner public administration.
Yeah. I'm going to give a bit of a more philosophical answer to also think about the larger role, perhaps. But I think if we start to use all these systems in our bureaucratic processes to boost them, to optimize them, the question becomes what gives them legitimacy. So as I tried to explain in my presentation, you really need to also have this democratic legibility of what you put in the systems and what comes out, and like what are the grounds of your decision making, and what kind of standards you, on the one hand, technically put into these systems, but also what kind of social standards you put into them. And that's why I was very happy with, on the one hand, Theo's comment on also the consequences, taking those into account. And Neal just said the context is very important. And to me, I would also want to add the layer of the things that can perhaps not be measured, or things that need more dialogue, or like what are you trying to measure and bring about with these systems? Which kinds of questions would your community like to see answered? Could they perhaps support in decision making around some of the trade-offs that need to be done? Because you cannot optimize for all purposes equally. You can on the one hand say accuracy is very important, but on the other hand, non-discrimination is also very important. And that's a continuous negotiation that you need to revisit with your community every now and then. So that kind of needs insights into on the one hand, the technical workings, but also the societal consequences and the ethical standards. Both are merged, I would say, in these systems.
Yeah. So we need to have this kind of sources of information, just in order to. Yeah, really good point. So Theo, do you want to add something?
I mean, in terms, the drivers for this are twofold. Yes, there was a public discussion. It was quite intense, but it wasn't a broad one. But the right questions, I think, were being asked about city agencies' approach to new technologies, and also part of it was to do with facial recognition, but there was also concern that things like administrative decisions, if they're automated, would come up with unfair outcomes. I mean, in essence, there's not a lot of AI, rich sort of deep AI in public administration. So yet, but as a city, and this is where I flip it onto the public administration driver, is that we want to be in step or in front of the argument, not behind it. And so that's why things like the DPIA register developed, because if we're collecting personal data, we're required by law to do it, and the recommendation is that you should publish it. But what usually happened, and we saw this with the NHS app that was trialed and deployed during the crisis, is quite often public agencies would only publish their data protection impact assessment when challenged. And that seems to be totally the wrong approach. It's like you should be designing and implementing and deploying something and publishing your thinking and how you are managing data risks all along. So we need to kind of just pivot our approach to public technology. I firmly believe the public wants the city to innovate, to bring benefits to them, but they also want us to know how we're doing it, and to talk to them like adults, so people can make up their own mind on what the trade-offs are. And there will always be some people who will say, no, I don't agree with sharing any data or a certain system that you're putting in place. But I think the more we talk and engage with people and are transparent with them, the more we can, we can shape things and also have a good basis for further innovation.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. So Matteo, from your perspective, since you are not, in the city hall as the other participants, but I was wondering if you have taken into account this explainability procedures when you design this software or algorithm that you explained before.
2 days ago, I just had another keynote speech in Italy about the quadruple helix approach. And this is something that we try to use immediately in Simpatico. So, the quadruple helix is research, industry, public administration, but citizen and civil society. That must be at the center of the innovation process. So we firmly believe that, and we ask the citizen, the civil servant, all stakeholders in order to bring them in immediately on this kind of innovation. So what do you really need? Would you trust a system that simplifies the language? For example, we learned immediately that we couldn't just show the simplified language because of a trust issue. So we have to show the both. And then it was a question of user interface. How can we show both original and simplified version in an easy way that so that it's not only comply with trust, but also with usability. And we went through this process for the final, let's say, system. So I firmly believe that this is the only way to proceed. And I firmly believe that this is where most H2020 project, as you say, where most of these fail, because they are not able to engage, they do not know how to engage the right stakeholder at the right time with the right methods.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's one of the main drawbacks of H2020 projects. So thank you. We are opening the floor.
Sorry. If I just make one comment about this also, I think it's also just very important to remember what we're comparing things to. So humans are very opaque. Human organizations are very opaque. They are also highly biased and have a lot of other kinds of problems. This is why a lot of this data is messed up in the first place. So it is very important to think about this in the context of systems, but we have to also maintain that background and context. I won't take the time here. There are many, many examples of sort of crazy decisions that are made in sensitive contexts by physicians, by judges, by many other kinds of human beings.
Yeah, totally agree. So we have only 5 minutes more, so I will open the floor to the public if you want to ask some questions to the speakers. I don't know, we have some microphones. Yeah, so we are starting the COVID procedure.
Hi, Theo and Matteo and Neal and Milou. Nice to see you here and welcome to Zaragoza in this virtual mode. You've extensively talked about transparency and transparency towards the citizen. But my feeling, and I'd like to know if you share it, is that civil servants don't understand algorithms, artificial intelligence too, because I mean they're so opaque, they're so dark. So what are you doing in terms of I don't know, of either capacity building or transparency also inside your house? Because many of these algorithms will be developed by external companies, I suppose. And so how do you get to know the first circle, which is the civil servants, to be aware of what these algorithms are really, doing or how they are working? So the first circle of transparency.
Good one. Who wants to start?
Yeah, I could give a couple of examples to start with, and the rest can follow. I would say that in Amsterdam we also see more and more political will to really educate civil servants on this topic. So that's also why it touches upon, on the one hand, the technical standards, and on the other hand, the social requirements and consequences that you should be able to explain the reasoning and the considerations that you make, and how values play a role in this. So we have a lot of workshop facilitators, for example, to really have this multidisciplinary discussions with the developer, with legal support, with ethical support, with policymakers of the domain, like what is the purpose of the system, what kind of standards do we set up for the system, and how do we also reevaluate and audit the workings of it. We also have more and more capacity to develop the systems that we use internally, so that we have less dependence on commercial parties. And final one I wanted to mention is for some systems we also make a choice to choose for explainable methods. Maybe they are less effective in their task, but if you say we really want our systems to we have to be able to explain their reasoning, then you can maybe not use certain AI techniques, but others you can use. So I think you can also just say we for important processes we do not use systems that we cannot explain. So to give an example, that was the case with the housing pilot. We put explainability first and used random forests to explain the decision criteria and to explain how, the reasoning. And we decided not to use other techniques because we didn't fully understand them.
Yeah.
Yes, I can say a couple. I think this is a great question. I think it's very important to obviously have that kind of education for the general public, but also in the civil service, for sure. Just a few quick examples. One is the criminal justice example that I gave. They actually sort of took some of that into account. You want to be able to do, you want to be able to contest the decision in a way and test out why the decision went a certain way or another. So if certain facts of the case are a little bit different, how would the recommendations change? So that came out through interviews with people in the court system, that this sort of thing was important, and they built sort of trust, which is why the relevant members are also able to use it. So I won't go into the details here, but there was a whole study about exactly how that was done and how that affected the design of the system. One other thing I'll say is that there are a lot of different ways to use machine learning. There have also been studies that are very effective on using it not to replace or even supplement a human decision, but to study what are opaque human decisions. So physicians are making, this is not necessarily government applications, but physicians are making decisions about XYZ, build an auxiliary model in order to gain some more transparency into what was done and then use it to inform changes to a purely human organization and process. So there's actually quite a broad scope for the use of these techniques that isn't just about sort of the narrow system itself. And I think that the technical discussion about is this statistical model explainable is too narrow. What we care about is the overall system and its impact on people and how it affects the general public and the organizations and contexts in which it's deployed.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, if we see this as like an IT thing, you know, that you're just buying in and you can just sort of stick in, that's you know, you can bolt on to an old system or way of doing things or process, then I don't rate its chances of success. But if you're designing a new system which has some added technology, whether it's sort of machine learning or whatever, then how you design the system with user needs at its heart is the most important thing. And, you know, to Milou's point, is that it's bringing people in multidisciplinary teams. It's sort of the data people, the tech people, plus the domain expertise, plus the user voice. That's how I think modern public services should be developed. So I think you know, we can focus perhaps a bit too much on the technology here. Of course, there needs to be safeguards, but it's about the whole system.
Yeah. So Matteo, do you want to add something?
Well, I'm not, I'm in a different position because I don't work in a public administration in a municipality. I can only say that this is a very interesting topic, not only for us, but for EU. You know that in the Digital Europe program, there are supposed to be about 600 million for advanced digital skill, not only of SMEs, but also on public administration. So we can see that in the future, we assume that there will be a lot of funding to do exactly that, to put up to speed the civil servant and public administration on AI, cybersecurity, and also HPC.
Yeah, thank you, Matteo. And we run out of time, so I want just to say thank you to be here, especially for Neal, which is, I think it's early in the morning on Friday. So, okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye,
And,
see you. Thanks.
Bye.